A mama dog lost all her puppies in a terrible fire, and everyone thought her story was over. But days later, deep in the ashes of her broken world, she hears something. Faint cries, not from her own, but from something else. What she does next leaves everyone stunned. This isn't just a story about loss. It's about a broken soul finding something worth protecting again. But when the truth behind those tiny cries comes to light, everything changes. Because those kittens weren't left there by accident, and someone dangerous is watching. She already lost everything once. Can she survive what's coming next? Or is this time even worse? You being here is a reminder. The quiet acts of love and kindness still matter. If you hold space for compassion, you're already part of this community. The gentle Tennessee breeze carried the sweet scent of honeysuckle across the rolling farmland as Gertie lay in her favorite spot beneath the old oak tree. Her graying muzzle rested on her paws, her soulful brown eyes watching the barn where her precious puppies slept peacefully in their nest of soft hay. The retired search and rescue dog had found a quiet life here on this small farm. Thanks to Sarah, the kind-hearted animal rescuer who had given her a home after her working days were done. The birth of her puppies 3 weeks ago had filled Gertie's heart with a joy she had never known before. Even after years of saving human lives in treacherous conditions, nothing compared to the tender moments she spent nurturing her little ones. She would gently clean their tiny faces, keep them warm with her body, and watch with pride as they squirmed and squeaked, their eyes not yet open to the world. As night fell, Gertie made her way to the barn for her evening check on her sleeping family. The air felt different somehow, thicker, warmer than usual. Her sensitive nose picked up an unfamiliar scent that made her hackles rise. Before she could reach the barn door, a bright orange glow erupted from inside, and thick black smoke began pouring through the gaps in the wooden planks. Fire. Gertie's training kicked in immediately. She lunged at the door, but it wouldn't budge. Something was blocking it from the outside. She barked frantically, her powerful voice carrying across the farm. Inside, she could hear her puppies crying, their frightened whimpers cutting through her heart like shards of glass. Sarah's voice rang out in the darkness, calling for help as she ran toward the barn. The flames were spreading quickly now, consuming the dry hay and wooden beams with terrifying speed. Gertie threw herself against the door again and again, her shoulder burning with pain. But nothing mattered except reaching her babies. Finally, the door gave way, splintering open. A wall of heat and smoke hit Gertie full force. Her eyes stung and her lungs burned, but her maternal instinct drove her forward. She could see the nest, where her puppies huddled together, crying for their mother. Just as she reached them, a burning beam crashed down, sending sparks flying everywhere. The roar of the fire was deafening. Sarah was screaming something, and other voices joined in. Neighbors who had seen the flames and come running. But Gertie could only focus on her puppies. She tried to grab them, to carry them to safety one by one, as she had been trained to do with human victims. But the flames were too fast, too fierce. The heat became unbearable. Another beam fell, and Gertie was forced back, away from her precious babies. Their cries grew fainter, then silent. The last thing she saw before Sarah dragged her out was the nest disappearing beneath a cascade of burning hay. Hours later, as firefighters doused the smoldering remains of the barn, Gertie stood in the ashes, her nose to the ground, desperately searching for any trace of her puppy's scent. Her paws were burned, her fur was singed, but she wouldn't stop looking. Sarah knelt beside her, tears streaming down her face as she gently tried to lead Gertie away. "I'm so sorry, girl," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "They're gone. They're gone." But Gertie couldn't accept it. She wandered through the ruins, whimpering softly, following phantom scents that led nowhere. The sun rose and set, but still she searched. Her training had taught her never to give up, to keep looking until she found who she was searching for. But this time, there would be no successful rescue, no joyful reunion. The local police came and went, muttering about accelerants and suspicious circumstances. They found evidence that someone had deliberately set the fire and blocked the door, but with no witnesses and no clear suspects, the case went cold. Sarah raged and wept, demanding justice, but Gertie barely noticed. Her world had shrunk to the space where her puppies had lived their brief lives. Days passed, and still Gertie returned to the barn's remains, lying among the ashes, her brown eyes distant and filled with unspoken grief. The once proud working dog, who had faced blizzards and earthquakes without flinching, was broken by this loss. Her body had survived the fire, but her heart lay buried beneath the charred ruins of the barn, along with the tiny lives she couldn't save. A week after the fire, Gertie's paws still left ashy prints wherever she walked. The once proud German Shepherd moved like a ghost through the burned remains of the barn, her nose constantly working, searching for something, anything, that might still carry the scent of her lost puppies. The morning dew had settled on the charred wood, mixing with the ash to create a thick black paste that clung to her graying fur. Sarah had tried everything to coax Gertie back to the house, leaving bowls of food and fresh water near the ruins, but Gertie barely touched them. Her muscular frame, built from years of rescue work, was starting to show signs of weakness. Still, she continued her vigil, driven by a grief too deep for rest. On this particular morning, something different caught her attention, a sound so faint that at first she thought it was just the wind whistling through the collapsed beams. But then she heard it again, a tiny, desperate mewing coming from beneath the fallen woodshed near the barn's remains. Gertie's ears perked up, her head tilting to pinpoint the source. The sound was weak, barely there, but it stirred something inside her that had been dormant since the fire. She moved closer to the woodshed, her nose twitching as she picked up an unfamiliar scent. The mewing came again, more urgent now. Gertie began to dig, her powerful paws scraping away debris and splintered wood. Her search and rescue training took over, and she worked with renewed purpose, carefully moving pieces of the collapsed structure aside. That's how Lionel Briggs found her when he came to check on his property that morning. The elderly farmer stood frozen, watching the German Shepherd work with single-minded determination. He hadn't visited this part of his land since letting Sarah use it for her animal rescue work. It brought back too many memories of his late wife, Martha, who had loved animals just as much as Sarah did. "What in heaven's name?" Lionel muttered, taking a hesitant step forward. Gertie didn't stop digging. Her paws were bleeding now, but she kept going until finally she reached what she'd been searching for. There, huddled together in a small pocket of space, were 5 tiny kittens. Their fur was matted and dirty, their bodies so thin their ribs showed through. They couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. Lionel's weathered face creased with concern as he moved closer. "Good Lord," he whispered, kneeling despite his arthritic knees. "Someone must have dumped them here." But before he could reach for the kittens, Gertie carefully positioned herself between them and Lionel. There was no aggression in her stance, but her intention was clear. These kittens were now under her protection. With infinite gentleness, she began cleaning the nearest kitten, her tongue carefully washing its tiny face just as she had done with her own puppies, such a short time ago. The transformation in Gertie was immediate and profound. The lost, haunted look in her eyes was replaced with purpose. One by one, she tended to each kitten, checking them over as thoroughly as she had once searched for survivors in disaster zones. When one of the kittens let out a particularly loud mew, she responded with a soft whine, nuzzling it reassuringly. Lionel stood back, his own eyes filling with tears at the scene before him. He remembered how Martha would take in every stray that crossed their path, how she'd always said that love had a way of healing the deepest wounds. Here was living proof of that wisdom, a grieving mother dog, finding new purpose in caring for abandoned kittens who desperately needed her. "Well," he said softly, pulling out his phone to call Sarah, "looks like you've found yourself a new family, old girl." Gertie didn't respond. too focused on her newfound charges. She was already trying to herd them into a closer group, using her body to shield them from the morning chill. Her tail, which hadn't wagged since the fire, gave a small, tentative sweep across the ground. The kittens, responding to her warmth and attention, began to purr weakly. They huddled against her, their tiny paws kneading her fur as they sought comfort. For the first time in days, Gertie lay down properly, curling her body around the kittens as if she'd been caring for them all along. Sarah arrived to find Lionel standing guard over Gertie and her adopted family, his lined face softer than she'd ever seen it. The German Shepherd looked up at their approach but didn't move from her position. Where there had been only ashes and loss, now there was a spark of new life. 5 tiny sparks, to be exact, nestled safely against the heart of a grieving mother who had found a reason to love again. The morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when Lionel returned to the woodshed with a cardboard box lined with soft blankets. He found Gertie exactly where he'd left her, curled protectively around the 5 tiny kittens. Her eyes, which had been so vacant after the fire, now watched him with alert intelligence. "Easy there, girl," he murmured, setting the box down. "Just trying to help." Gertie's tail thumped against the ground in recognition. Over the past few hours, she'd seemed to sense that Lionel meant no harm to her adopted family. The elderly farmer knelt down carefully, his joints protesting the movement. "Let's get these little ones somewhere warm and dry," he said, his weathered hands gentle as he lifted the first kitten. The tiny creature fit in his palm, reminding him of how Martha used to care for abandoned animals. She would have loved this moment. One by one, Lionel examined the kittens, placing them in the box while Gertie watched attentively. "You've got yourself quite a mix here," he commented. There was a black one with white paws, 2 tabbies, an orange fellow, and a little gray one with striking blue eyes. "Think it's time we gave them proper names," Lionel mused, surprising himself. He hadn't named an animal since Martha passed. It had felt too personal, too permanent. But watching Gertie's dedication had stirred something in his heart, melting the ice that had formed there. "This black and white fellow," he said, stroking the first kitten's head, "reminds me of my old tuxedo cat, Boots. So that's what we'll call him." Gertie inched closer, resting her head near the box as Lionel continued the naming ceremony. The 2 tabbies became Pepper and Salt, the orange one Marmalade, and the gray one, the smallest of the bunch, he named Storm. As he lifted Storm to place her back in the box, something caught his eye. Around the kitten's neck was a thin, worn collar with what appeared to be a veterinary tag. "Now what's this?" Lionel muttered, turning the tag over in his fingers. Most of the text was worn away, but he could make out part of a phone number and what looked like a clinic name. His heart sank as realization dawned. These kittens hadn't been born in the wild. They'd belonged to someone. Gertie sensed his change in mood, raising her head with concern. Lionel sat back on his heels, anger building in his chest. "Someone left them here to die," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "Just dump them like garbage." The German Shepherd whined softly, pressing closer to the box of kittens. Her maternal instincts had saved these innocent lives, but the discovery of the tag raised disturbing questions. Who would abandon such young kittens? And why here, near the burned remains of the barn? Lionel found himself studying the tag more closely. Though most of the numbers were worn away, he could make out the first 3 digits of the phone number. It was a local area code. Someone nearby had done this. "We'll need to get them properly checked out," he told Gertie, who was now attempting to climb into the cardboard box with her charges. "But first, they need food." He retrieved the supplies Sarah had left, tiny bottles and kitten formula. It had been years since he'd bottle-fed a kitten, but the memories came flooding back. Martha had taught him how to hold them just right, how to make sure they didn't drink too fast. To his surprise, Gertie proved to be an excellent assistant. She helped clean each kitten after feeding, just as she would have done with her own puppies. Her presence seemed to calm them, making the whole process easier. As Lionel worked, he felt something shift inside him. The familiar ache of loneliness that had been his constant companion since Martha's passing began to ease. These small creatures needed him, and more importantly, they needed him to care again. He glanced at the tag once more before slipping it into his pocket. There would be time later to unravel that mystery. For now, these kittens needed warmth, food, and love, things he and Gertie had in abundance, even if they'd forgotten that fact until today. "Your Martha would be proud," Sarah said from behind him, making him start. He hadn't heard her approach. "She always said you had the gentlest hands with the little ones." Lionel didn't turn around, not wanting Sarah to see the moisture in his eyes. Instead, he watched as Storm, the smallest kitten, suckled contentedly from the bottle in his hands, while Gertie looked on with maternal pride. "Well," he said finally, his voice gruff with emotion, "someone's got to help Gertie with her new family." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Lionel's kitchen table as he spread out his notes beside the worn veterinary tag. After 3 hours of phone calls to local clinics, he'd finally gotten a lead. The partial number matched Valley View Animal Hospital, and the receptionist had recognized the tag's design immediately. "Those were our standard tags back in 2018, she'd told him. "Let me check our records." What she found made Lionel's blood run cold. The tag was registered to an address linked to Dean Raskin, a name that made the receptionist pause before speaking again. "Mr. Briggs," she'd said quietly, "be careful with this information. That man, there have been rumors. Nothing proven, but..." Lionel had heard the rumors too. Stories of illegal breeding operations, exotic animal trading, and worse. He'd seen Raskin around town occasionally, a stocky man with shifty eyes who always wore a dark jacket and baseball cap, even in summer. Now, sitting at his kitchen table, Lionel watched through the window as Gertie dozed beside the cardboard box of kittens on the back porch. The German Shepherd had hardly left their side, except when Sarah came by to help with feedings. The sharp ring of his telephone made him jump. When he answered, there was only silence, then a click. This happened 3 more times over the next hour. As evening approached, Lionel went to check the mail. There, propped against his front door, was a plain white envelope. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 5 words typed in bold letters, "Keep the dog out of it." His hands shaking, Lionel hurried to move Gertie and the kittens inside. He set them up in the mudroom, making sure all the doors and windows were locked before retiring to bed. But sleep wouldn't come. Every creak of the old farmhouse made him start. It was just past midnight when Gertie's low growl cut through the darkness. Lionel sat up in bed, his heart pounding. The growl deepened, followed by the unmistakable sound of breaking glass. He grabbed his flashlight and rushed downstairs. The beam caught the mudroom door standing open, cool night air streaming in. Inside, a dark figure in a ski mask was reaching for the box of kittens. Gertie launched herself at the intruder with a ferocity that made Lionel stumble back. Her powerful jaws clamped onto the masked figure's arm as the kittens mewled in terror. The intruder swung something heavy, a metal pipe, catching Gertie in the ribs with a sickening thud. But Gertie didn't let go. She drove the attacker back, away from her adopted babies, even as the pipe struck her again and again. Blood matted her fur, but her grip remained firm. Lionel finally found his voice. "Get out!" he roared, charging forward. The intruder wrenched free from Gertie's grip and fled through the broken window, leaving behind a scrap of black fabric from their jacket. Gertie collapsed, her breathing labored. Blood trickled from cuts on her face and sides, and she whimpered when Lionel touched her ribs. "Sarah!" he shouted into the phone moments later, his voice cracking. "We need help. Gertie's hurt bad." While they waited for Sarah to arrive, Lionel knelt beside the injured dog. Gertie's eyes never left the box of kittens, even as pain racked her body. She'd protected them with everything she had, just as she would have protected her own puppies. "You brave girl," Lionel whispered, gently stroking her graying muzzle. "You saved them. They're safe because of you." The kittens, seemingly sensing Gertie's distress, crawled from their box and huddled against her. Little Storm, the smallest, pressed herself against the shepherd's neck, purring softly. Sarah arrived with her medical kit, face grim as she examined Gertie's injuries. 2 broken ribs, she reported. Multiple cuts and bruises. She needs a vet, Lionel. Will she be okay? His voice sounded strange to his own ears, thick with worry. She's strong, Sarah assured him, preparing a pain injection. But this was no random attack. Someone wanted those kittens badly enough to hurt her. Lionel picked up the scrap of black fabric the intruder had left behind. In the bright beam of his flashlight, he could make out part of a logo, the same one he'd seen on Dean Raskin's jacket in town. As Sarah worked to stabilize Gertie, Lionel's grief turned to anger. This wasn't just about abandoned kittens anymore. Someone had tried to hurt his family, because that's what Gertie and these tiny creatures had become. And Lionel Briggs was done being the quiet widower who kept to himself. Gertie's eyes met his, filled with pain, but also unwavering determination. Despite her injuries, she was still trying to inch closer to the kittens. Her devotion touched something deep in Lionel's heart, awakening a protective fury he hadn't felt in years. The veterinary clinic's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the examination room as Dr. Chen gently probed Gertie's injuries. The German shepherd lay quietly on the metal table, her eyes fixed on the carrier containing her precious kittens. Even now, after the brutal attack, her main concern was keeping them in sight. 2 broken ribs, multiple contusions, and several deep cuts, Dr. Chen reported, her gentle hands working methodically. She's lucky nothing vital was damaged. The pipe could have done much worse. Lionel stood beside the table, one hand resting on Gertie's head. Will she recover fully? With rest and proper care, yes. Dr. Chen's expression darkened as she examined the kittens next. But these little ones, Mr. Briggs, I need to show you something disturbing. She lifted each kitten carefully, pointing out marks hidden beneath their fur. See these old wounds? The scarring patterns? These kittens weren't just abandoned. They were used as bait animals. Bait animals? Lionel's voice cracked. In dogfighting rings. Dr. Chen's normally calm demeanor cracked slightly. They use small animals to train fighting dogs, to build their prey drive. It's absolutely horrific. And these marks? She pointed to distinctive circular burns. This is a signature I've seen before. It matches cases linked to Dean Raskin's operation. Lionel's hands clenched into fists. The fire at my farm. Could it be connected? Dr. Chen's eyes met his. In the past 2 years, 3 local properties known for harboring rescued animals have had mysterious fires. No human casualties, but many animals were lost. It's a warning tactic used by these rings to discourage people from interfering with their operations. The truth hit Lionel like a physical blow. Gertie's puppies hadn't died by accident. They'd been murdered as a message. His quiet farm had somehow threatened Raskin's cruel enterprise. The police, he began, have been unable to prove anything, Dr. Chen finished. Raskin has connections. People are afraid to testify, but... She hesitated, then went to her desk and wrote down a number. There's a journalist who's been investigating these cases, Melody Briggs from the Nashville Herald. She's been gathering evidence, building a case. Lionel stared at the name, his heart skipping a beat. Melody, she's my late wife's niece. Then maybe this isn't a coincidence, Dr. Chen said softly. These kittens found their way to your farm for a reason, and Gertie's protection of them has exposed something much bigger than we realized. Back home, with Gertie settled carefully in her bed and the kittens secure beside her, Lionel picked up the phone. His hands trembled slightly as he dialed Melody's number. They hadn't spoken since Catherine's funeral 3 years ago. Uncle Lionel? Melody's voice was surprised but warm. Is everything okay? No, he said simply and told her everything. The fire, the kittens, Gertie's attack, and Dr. Chen's revelations about Dean Raskin. There was a long pause before Melody spoke again. "I've been tracking Raskin for 18 months, she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "He's connected to a network of illegal breeding operations and dogfighting rings across 3 states. But every time we get close to solid evidence, witnesses back out or evidence disappears. What happened at your farm, it fits his pattern." "The kittens have marks," Lionel said. "Dr. Chen says they prove what was done to them." "Physical evidence," Melody's voice sharpened with interest, "and a respected veterinarian willing to testify about it. Uncle Lionel, this could be the break we've been waiting for. But," she paused, "it could be dangerous. Raskin's already shown he's willing to hurt animals to send a message. Are you sure you want to get involved?" Lionel looked at Gertie, watching how tenderly she curled around the kittens despite her injuries. He thought of his Catherine, who had always fought for those who couldn't defend themselves. "These monsters killed Gertie's puppies to send a message," he said firmly. "They tortured these kittens. They're still out there, hurting more animals. Catherine would never have stayed quiet about this. Neither will I." "I'll be there tomorrow morning," Melody said. "We'll need to document everything. And Uncle Lionel, thank you for calling. Aunt Catherine would be proud." After hanging up, Lionel sat beside Gertie's bed. The brave dog lifted her head slightly, and he gently scratched behind her ears. "You did more than save these kittens, old girl," he murmured. "You helped us uncover something terrible, but we're going to make it right. I promise." The kittens slept peacefully against Gertie's warm body, unaware that their rescue had set in motion events that would finally bring their tormentors to justice. Outside, the night was quiet, but Lionel knew the real fight was just beginning. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows as Melody spread photographs and documents across Lionel's worn oak table. Gertie lay nearby on her cushioned bed, the 5 kittens nestled against her. Despite her bandaged ribs and visible bruises, the German Shepherd kept a watchful eye on both her charges and the humans working to build their case. "Dr. Chen's medical report is crucial," Melody said, organizing papers into neat piles. "The distinctive burn patterns on the kittens match 3 other cases I've documented." She pulled out her laptop and showed Lionel photographs of similar injuries on other rescued animals. "All roads lead back to Dean Raskin, but he's always managed to stay just out of reach." Lionel studied the disturbing images, his jaw tight. "And the police?" "They're afraid," Melody explained, running a hand through her curly hair in frustration. "Raskin has friends in high places, money talks, and threats work even better. But this time," she gestured to their growing collection of evidence, "this time we have something different." They spent hours documenting everything. Melody photographed Gertie's injuries from multiple angles, while Lionel recorded detailed notes about the night of the attack. They carefully preserved the threatening note left on the porch and cataloged the distinctive veterinary tag found on one of the kittens. Throughout their work, Gertie remained a steady presence. When the kittens needed feeding, she would nose them gently, and Lionel would prepare their formula. Her maternal dedication never wavered, despite her own pain. "She's more than just evidence," Melody observed, watching Gertie tenderly clean the smallest kitten. "She's the heart of this whole thing. People need to see this. A former search and rescue dog who lost her own puppies to these criminals, now protecting the very animals they used as bait. It puts a face on all the cruelty." Later that afternoon, they presented their findings to Sheriff Morgan at the local police station. The officer's discomfort was obvious as he flipped through their documentation. "Look," he said, closing the folder, "I understand your concerns, but we need more than circumstantial evidence to move against someone like Raskin. These photos, the vet reports, they prove abuse happened, but they don't prove who did it." "Then what would you need?" Melody pressed, her reporter's instinct kicking in. "What kind of evidence would force you to act?" The sheriff hesitated. "Location, numbers, concrete proof of ongoing operations. Without that, it's just speculation." As they left the station, Melody's phone buzzed. She checked the message and grabbed Lionel's arm. "I have a contact," she whispered. "Someone inside Raskin's operation who's willing to talk. They can tell us where the compound is, show us documentation of everything. It could be a trap, Lionel warned. It's a risk we have to take, Melody insisted. This could be our only chance to shut him down for good. Back at the farm, they discussed their options while tending to Gertie and the kittens. The German Shepherd's steady presence helped calm their nerves as they planned their next moves. My source wants to meet tomorrow night, Melody explained, gently stroking one of the kittens. At the old Miller's Creek Bridge. They say they have photos, financial records, everything we need to prove what Raskin's been doing. Lionel watched Gertie carefully lifting a kitten that had strayed too far from its siblings. Her gentleness, despite her own injuries, strengthened his resolve. We owe it to them to try, he said quietly. To Gertie's puppies, to these kittens, to all the animals we don't even know about yet. Melody nodded, her expression determined. We'll need to be careful. I'll bring my camera, recording equipment, document everything. She looked at Gertie, who was watching them with those soulful brown eyes. She's become a symbol of everything we're fighting for. Protection of the innocent, courage in the face of cruelty, love overcoming loss. Then we'll make sure her story helps end this, Lionel said firmly. No more fires, no more threats, no more injured animals. They spent the rest of the evening preparing for the meeting, gathering equipment and planning contingencies. Gertie remained their constant companion, her quiet strength a reminder of why they had to succeed. Each time they looked at her caring for the kittens, creatures that by all rights she should have feared or rejected, they found renewed purpose in their dangerous mission. As night fell, Lionel and Melody made their final preparations. Tomorrow would bring either the breakthrough they needed or dangers they couldn't yet imagine. But watching Gertie's unwavering dedication to her adopted family, they knew they had no choice but to try. The morning fog hung heavy over the countryside as Lionel drove toward Dr. Chen's veterinary clinic for Gertie's checkup. His headlights cut through the mist, revealing an image that made his blood run cold. Where the small brick building should have stood, only smoking ruins remained. Fire trucks lined the street, their red lights pulsing through the gray dawn. No, 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 Lionel muttered, his hands trembling as he parked his truck. He rushed toward the scene, where firefighters were still dousing hot spots in the blackened wreckage. Sheriff Morgan stood at the perimeter, his face grim. Happened around 3 this morning, he said as Lionel approached. Dr. Chen is okay. She wasn't here. But... Gertie? Lionel's voice cracked. The kittens? They were staying overnight for observation. The sheriff's silence told him everything. Lionel stumbled backward, his mind racing. This was Dean's work. It had to be. First the barn, now this. The pattern was clear. Without waiting for permission, Lionel began searching the area around the clinic. His eyes caught something in the mud behind the building. Paw prints, larger than a typical dog's, Gertie's. And beside them, dark spots that looked terrifyingly like blood. Over here, he called out. The sheriff joined him, shining his flashlight on the ground. The tracks led toward the woods, then disappeared into the underbrush. They're alive, Lionel said firmly. Gertie got them out. She had to. For the next 3 hours, Lionel drove every back road in the county, stopping frequently to check for signs. His heart pounded each time he spotted a flash of movement in the trees, only to find it was just a deer or wild dog. But he refused to give up. Near noon, on a seldom-used logging road, he found fresh tracks again. Blood drops marked a trail leading toward an old industrial area, specifically the abandoned Riverside meatpacking plant. The property had been bought by one of Dean's shell companies years ago. As Lionel pulled over to investigate, a familiar shape emerged from the trees. Gertie limped toward his truck, her fur matted with dirt and blood. Despite her injuries, her eyes were alert and focused. "Oh, thank God," Lionel breathed, rushing to her. She was hurt worse than before, with new cuts across her shoulders and a deep gash on her leg. But she was alive. Gertie didn't wait for comfort. Instead, she turned and started walking purposefully back toward the meatpacking plant. stopping to look back at Lionel with urgent eyes. "The kittens," Lionel realized. "You know where they are." He followed as Gertie led him through the woods, staying low and quiet. The old plant loomed ahead, its rusty walls rising like a fortress. Gertie moved with determination, taking him around the perimeter to a broken section of chain-link fence. Through gaps in the metal siding, Lionel could hear faint mewing sounds. His heart clenched. The kittens were alive too. But he could also hear voices inside, rough and angry. Dean's men were there. Gertie pressed against his leg, trembling but determined. She had escaped their captivity, fought her way free, and come back. Not to run away, but to show Lionel where to find her adopted babies. Even injured and exhausted, she refused to abandon them. Lionel pulled out his phone and dialed Melody's number with shaking fingers. "I found them," he whispered when she answered. "The old meatpacking plant on River Road. Gertie led me here. The kittens are inside, but Dean's men—" He swallowed hard. "We need help. Real help this time." "Stay put," Melody said firmly. "I'm calling in every favor I have. And Lionel, don't let Gertie try to go back in. She's done her part." As if understanding, Gertie sank down beside him in the undergrowth. Her eyes remained fixed on the building where her kittens were held, but she stayed close to Lionel, her body tense and ready. Together, they watched and waited, while inside the old plant, evidence of Dean's cruelty lay exposed at last. The inside of the meatpacking plant reeked of rust and something far worse. Lionel crept through the shadows with Gertie at his side, following the sound of frightened animals and rough voices. Their footsteps echoed on the concrete floor despite their best efforts to stay quiet. Through a broken door, they entered what must have been the main processing floor. Lionel's stomach turned at what he saw. The space had been converted into a makeshift arena with tall chain-link fencing forming a crude fighting pit in the center. Wooden bleachers surrounded it, stained dark with what he feared was blood. Gertie's muscles tensed as they moved deeper into the facility. Row after row of steel cages lined the walls, each containing animals in various states of neglect. Pit bulls with scarred faces pressed against the bars, while others cowered in the corners of their prisons. The smell of fear and suffering was overwhelming. "Easy, girl," Lionel whispered, steadying Gertie with a gentle hand. Her eyes were fixed on something ahead, a small cage elevated on a metal table near the fighting pit. Inside, 5 tiny shapes huddled together. The kittens. Lionel pulled out his phone, his hands shaking as he started documenting everything. He photographed the fighting ring, the bedding slips scattered nearby, and the rows of injured animals. Each image was damning evidence of Dean's cruelty. A door slammed somewhere in the building. Voices grew closer. "Just check the new shipment," a gruff voice ordered. "Boss wants everything ready for tonight's fights." Lionel and Gertie ducked behind a stack of old crates. 2 men walked past carrying clipboards and speaking in low tones about fresh bait and good odds. Lionel's camera clicked silently, capturing their faces. When the men moved to a different section, Lionel crept toward the kitten's cage. They mewed softly at his approach, recognizing him. But before he could reach them, Gertie suddenly growled, a deep, warning sound. Dean Raskin himself stepped out of an office doorway, phone pressed to his ear. "Don't worry about the old man," he was saying. "Once tonight's fights are done, we'll clear everything out. He won't find—" Dean's eyes locked onto Lionel. For a moment, everyone froze. Then Gertie launched herself forward, barking furiously. Her sudden attack sent Dean stumbling backward into a stack of metal chairs. The crash echoed through the building like a gunshot. "Get them!" Dean shouted, scrambling to his feet. "Don't let them leave!" Lionel grabbed the kitten's cage and ran. Gertie stayed close, her powerful body blocking anyone from getting too near. They could hear boots pounding on concrete behind them, angry voices calling out directions. A bullet pinged off a metal beam near Lionel's head. He ducked and ran faster, clutching the cage to his chest. The kittens cried out in fear. Gertie led them down a different path than they'd entered, seeming to sense which ways were clear. They burst through an emergency exit into the bright afternoon sun. The alarm blared behind them, adding to the chaos. "Stop right there!" Dean's voice rang out. Lionel glanced back to see him standing in the doorway, gun raised. But Gertie wasn't finished. She charged at Dean one last time, her teeth bared. He fired, but the shot went wild as he stumbled backward into the building. The door slammed shut between them. Lionel and Gertie ran until they reached the broken section of fence. They squeezed through, the cage barely fitting through the gap. Only when they were hidden in the dense woods did they pause to catch their breath. "Good girl," Lionel gasped, checking the kittens. They were frightened, but unharmed. "You saved us all." Gertie stood guard while Lionel examined his phone. His hands were still shaking, but the evidence was clear. Dozens of photos showing every detail of Dean's operation. The fighting pit, the injured animals, even Dean himself. Finally, they had proof that couldn't be ignored. But Dean's words echoed in his mind. "Once tonight's fights are done, we'll clear everything out." They had to act fast. Dean would be desperate now that he'd been exposed. Lionel pulled out his phone to call Melody, keeping his voice low. "We got it, all of it. But Dean saw us. He's going to try to destroy everything." "Get somewhere safe," Melody replied urgently. "I'm meeting my contact at the FBI in 20 minutes. Don't go home. He'll look there first." Lionel looked down at Gertie, who stood alert despite her injuries, still protecting her adopted kittens. They weren't safe yet. Dean would be coming for them, and he had nothing left to lose. The parking lot of the abandoned truck stop seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. Lionel sat in his pickup truck, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. Gertie lay quietly in the passenger seat, her ears alert despite appearing relaxed. They were early for the meeting, just as planned. "Remember," Detective Sarah Martinez's voice crackled through the hidden earpiece, "keep him talking about the fights. We need him to incriminate himself on tape." Lionel adjusted his worn leather jacket, the one with the tiny microphone sewn into the collar. His heart pounded so hard he worried it might interfere with the recording. Gertie nudged his arm with her nose, as if sensing his anxiety. "I know, girl," he whispered. "We've got to be brave, just a little longer." Headlights swept across the cracked asphalt as a black SUV pulled into the lot. Dean Raskin stepped out, followed by two burly men. Even in the dim light, Lionel could see Dean's signature smirk. "Showtime," Lionel muttered, climbing out of his truck. Gertie followed, her protective instincts visible in every measured step. "Well, well," Dean called out. "The farmer wants to become a player." His eyes narrowed at the sight of Gertie. "And you brought your guard dog." Lionel forced a casual shrug. "Heard you run the best fights in 3 states. Figured it was time to get in on the action." "Funny timing," Dean circled closer, "considering recent events at my facility." "Business is business," Lionel replied. "I've got money to invest. Unless you'd rather I take it elsewhere?" Dean's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Let's talk numbers then. How much are you looking to put down?" $10,000 for the first fight, Lionel said, patting the envelope in his jacket. "More if things go well." As they talked, Lionel could feel the presence of hidden officers in the surrounding darkness. Melody was out there too, documenting everything from a concealed position. The plan was simple: get Dean to explicitly discuss his operation, then signal the takedown. "Your dog there," Dean gestured to Gertie. "She's got good breeding. Strong jaw. Ever consider putting her in the ring?" Lionel's stomach turned, but he kept his voice steady. "That's actually why I brought her. Thought you might want to evaluate her potential." Dean moved closer to examine Gertie, who remained perfectly still. "Nice muscle tone. Combat experience too, I'd bet. These retired service dogs often make the best fighters. They already know how to." He stopped suddenly, his eyes narrowing. In that moment, Lionel knew something had gone wrong. Dean's hand moved to his waistband. You know what's interesting? Dean's voice turned ice cold. That dog of yours was in my facility last week. The gun appeared in his hand, aimed at Lionel's chest, along with a nosy old man taking pictures. Now hold on. Lionel started to raise his hands. Shut up. Dean grabbed Lionel's arm, pressing the gun into his ribs. Signal your police friends to stay back, or I put a bullet in you right now. Gertie's growl rumbled low and threatening, but she held her position, trained to wait for the right moment. I've got him, Dean shouted to the darkness. Anyone moves, he dies. The night air crackled with tension. Lionel could hear rapid whispers through his earpiece as the police teams repositioned. Dean began backing toward his SUV, dragging Lionel with him. All that evidence you collected? Dean hissed in Lionel's ear. It's gone. Burned it all last night. You've got nothing. That's where you're wrong, Lionel replied, his voice stronger than he felt. The photos were uploaded instantly. The FBI has everything. Dean's grip tightened painfully. Then I've got nothing left to lose, do I? The gun pressed harder into Lionel's side. In that split second, several things happened at once. Gertie, reading the escalating threat, launched herself at Dean with explosive force. Dean's gun arm jerked upward as he tried to aim at the attacking dog. And from behind a stack of old pallets, Melody emerged like a shadow. The crack of the metal pipe against Dean's shoulder echoed across the parking lot. He stumbled, losing his grip on both Lionel and the gun. Gertie's powerful jaws clamped onto Dean's arm, bringing him down to the pavement. Police, don't move! Multiple voices shouted as officers swarmed in from all directions, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Dean's men were quickly surrounded and disarmed. Dean thrashed under Gertie's hold, cursing and threatening, even as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. You're dead, he spat at Lionel. All of you. Detective Martinez stepped into the light, her badge gleaming. Dean Raskin, you're under arrest for animal cruelty, operating illegal fighting rings, attempted murder, and about 24 other charges we're looking forward to discussing. As police cars flooded the parking lot with red and blue lights, Melody helped Lionel to his feet. You okay? Lionel nodded, still shaking slightly. Thanks to you and Gertie. He knelt beside his faithful companion, who had finally released Dean to the officers. You saved my life, girl. Gertie pressed against his side, her tail wagging slowly as she watched Dean being led away. In the distance, they could hear more sirens approaching. Police units heading to Dean's compound to free the animals still trapped inside. We did it, Melody said softly, her hand resting on Lionel's shoulder. It's really over. Detective Martinez approached them, looking pleased. The recordings are clear as day. Between his threats tonight and your previous evidence, he's going away for a long time. We've got teams heading to 3 different locations connected to his operation. A lot of animals are going to sleep safer tonight, thanks to you all. Lionel scratched behind Gertie's ears, remembering the frightened animals they'd seen in those cages. Thanks to Gertie, he corrected. She's the real hero here. Gertie's tail wagged faster at his words, as if understanding that her long mission, from the loss of her puppies to protecting the abandoned kittens to bringing down Dean's cruel empire, had finally reached its end. In the weeks following Dean Raskin's arrest, autumn painted the Tennessee countryside in warm colors. The morning sun cast long shadows across Lionel's farmland, where construction crews worked to transform old barns into modern animal shelters. The property that had once been a place of tragedy was becoming something new, something hopeful. Gertie lay on the front porch watching the activity with alert interest. Her graying muzzle rested on her paws, but her eyes tracked every movement. The local newspaper beside her declared in bold letters, "Hero Dog brings down animal fighting ring." The story had spread far beyond their small community, touching hearts across the state and beyond. Lionel stepped out onto the porch, coffee mug in hand, and settled into his rocking chair. "Big day today, girl," he said softly. Gertie's tail thumped against the wooden boards in response. The sound of tires on gravel announced Melody's arrival. She stepped out of her car carrying a cardboard box filled with adoption papers and photographs. "You ready for this?" she called out, climbing the porch steps. "As ready as we'll ever be," Lionel replied, standing to help her with the box. Inside the farmhouse, 5 healthy, energetic kittens tumbled and played in a pen Lionel had built specially for them. No longer the frightened, malnourished creatures Gertie had discovered, they had grown into vibrant young cats. Each one bore a collar with a small silver tag, a stark contrast to the cruel marker that had led to their rescue. "The families will be here in an hour," Melody said, sorting through the papers. "All thoroughly vetted, all experienced with rescue animals." She paused, watching Gertie pad over to the pen and nose each kitten gently. "Are you sure you don't want to keep any of them?" Lionel shook his head, though his eyes were soft. "They deserve their own homes. Besides, we'll have our hands full soon enough." He gestured to the blueprints spread across his kitchen table. The New Beginnings Animal Sanctuary plans showed converted barns, exercise yards, and rehabilitation spaces. In the corner, in Lionel's careful handwriting, was a dedication. "In memory of Sarah Briggs, who taught me to open my heart." "Your wife would have loved this," Melody said quietly. "She always wanted to help animals," Lionel replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I was too caught up in my own grief to see it before. But Gertie..." He looked at the German shepherd who had settled among the kittens like a watchful guardian. "She showed me how to turn loss into something meaningful." The first adoptive family arrived just as the clock struck 10 o'clock. A young couple with 2 children stepped tentatively into the house, their eyes wide with excitement. The smallest kitten, a gray tabby they'd named Hope, immediately bounded toward the children. "She's perfect," the mother whispered, watching her kids giggle as the kitten played with their shoelaces. One by one, the families came. Each meeting was filled with joy, tears, and promises to stay in touch. Gertie supervised every interaction, her maternal instincts evident in the way she watched each kitten being carefully placed in their carriers. The last family was an elderly couple who had lost their cat of 16 years. The largest kitten, a black and white male named Courage, climbed straight into the woman's lap and began to purr. "We'll take good care of him," the woman promised, her eyes meeting Gertie's. "Thank you for saving them." As the afternoon sun began to set, Lionel and Melody sat with Gertie on the porch, watching the construction crews pack up for the day. The pen where the kittens had played stood empty, but there was no sadness in the air, only a sense of completion. "The sanctuary opens next month," Lionel said, running his hand along Gertie's back. "We've already got 3 dogs and 2 horses coming in from the cases connected to Dean's operation." Melody smiled, pulling out one last piece of paper from her folder. "And I've got something for Gertie." It was a certificate from the state's Animal Welfare Association, recognizing Gertie's role in bringing down one of the largest animal fighting operations in Tennessee history. Along with it came a special collar tag inscribed with the words "Guardian Angel." "The ceremony's next week," Melody explained. "They want to make her the sanctuary's official ambassador. Her story's already inspired 6 other counties to strengthen their animal welfare laws." Gertie accepted the gentle placing of the new tag on her collar with dignity. Her brown eyes, still bright despite her advancing years, seemed to hold a deep understanding. She had transformed her deepest loss into a mission of protection, and in doing so, had changed countless lives, human and animal alike. As evening settled over the farm, Lionel watched Gertie make her rounds of the property. She moved more slowly now, but with purpose, checking each building and fence line, just as she had done every night since arriving. But there was peace in her step that hadn't been there before. "You know," Lionel said to Melody, "when I first found her after the fire, I thought she was broken beyond repair. We both were, really, locked in our grief, unable to move forward." He gestured to the sanctuary taking shape around them. "Now look at us." Melody nodded, understanding in her eyes. Sometimes the biggest acts of courage come from the deepest wounds. Gertie returned to the porch, settling between them with a contented sigh. The property around them was quiet now, but it hummed with possibility. Where there had once been ashes and loss, new life would soon flourish. And at its heart would be an aging German shepherd who had taught them all about the healing power of love and the strength found in second chances. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Gertie's head rested on Lionel's knee, her eyes closing peacefully. She had completed her journey from grieving mother to heroic savior, and in doing so, had helped create a legacy that would continue to save lives for years to come. "Good girl, Gertie," Lionel whispered, his voice full of pride and love. "Good girl." Thank you for watching. If even one moment stayed with you, don't forget to subscribe. I'll be here tomorrow with another story that speaks to the heart.